Welcome, everybody, to FraxCheck, your weekly Frax vibe check. I'm your host, Capital K, and I'm joined by our producer extraordinaire, Sam. This week, it is May 17th to May 23rd, and I believe this is FraxCheck number 40. We hit a nice big round numbers, and we like to see it. But before we jump in, checking the source via checking the chain, please smash that subscribe button, hit that like button, and join the conversation at Flywheel DeFi on Twitter and Telegram. Sam, this week I feel like it's quiet. It's so quiet that I don't know if it's going to just abruptly implode on my face next week or that we're just going to keep me on the tip of suspense here. Like things are just like quiet across the board for Frax, except for one thing, but we'll get to that. But like always, we'll start with the flagship product that is the Frax stablecoin, and the supply is the same since like April.
Great.
And like beginning of April, and I feel like we're hanging on to a thread onto our 3 comma club, but nonetheless, we're still part of the club. So we're at 1 billion in supply right now for Frax, the stable coin.
Mhm.
Next slide, we'll check on the peg, and the range is tight. Goes from $1 on the highs to 0.999 on the lows. So very, very tight. Then we go into the markets and we do a quick swap of 100 million Frax to USDC. On Curve, you receive an exchange rate of 0.9979. And as always, I kind of don't like it when we see a 7 in this exchange rate. So let's kind of bring that back up to an 8. Just some rebalancing in the pool will do so. Now, following, we have our collateralization percent, which has again been around this 94.8% for the past, I want to say, almost a month or so. At least 3 FraxChecks, we've been at this all-time high of 94.8%. And on the decentralization percent, we actually saw a nice bump up 4.4% this week to 21.5. We were going down this downtrend, as you can kind of see through the graph there. But for folks listening, we've been basically in this downtrend from like 23s all the way trending down to the low to the 20s. And now we saw a bump up to 21.5. So that's how the Frax flagship stablecoin product has been doing. On the next slide, you'll see the Frax BP, which is effectively the Frax liquidity as a service. And here we saw a minor drop of 60 bips on the Frax BP TVL, which currently sits at 498 million. So again, pretty much unchanged. On the volume front, we've done 32 million this month so far in May, and that's about 6% in utilization rate. Fairly low. I would definitely say that's a fairly low rate. We want to facilitate more volume here. And yeah, that's pretty much the comment. The only time that this volume number actually, or the utilization number actually put up some great returns for the LPers was during the Circle crisis. That actually put up some really great trading volume for for the day or two. But nonetheless, I want to share the new all-time high that we did make though, and we hit 130% in the percent of 3 pool. That is, we are Frax BP is now 130% of the 3 pool. We've been consistently above 100, and we were initially first in the 110, 115 range. And ever since then, we just kind of broke off the stratosphere, and we're kind of making new all-time high week after week. We've truly are in a new regime in the Curve ecosystem.
It's probably time to phase this out because
Yeah,
I don't think
I
three
think
pool's
so.
coming back.
Yeah, I definitely think so too. So I think we're in a new regime. This is probably going to be the last time we kind of see this. So I'll for next week we're no longer tracking this. But moving forward, I don't know if the slides are loading. Sam, it's kind of stuck for me.
One second. I'll get it while we go. Keep going.
Okay, all right. On the next slide, there you go. On the next slide, you'll see a breakdown of all the current pools in the Frax and Curve ecosystem. We have Frax BP at 498 million, 3 pool at 382, Frax 3 CRV at 285, and Frax PP, a new contender, at 112. So if you quickly just tally it up, Frax is effectively 900 million versus Frax 3 CRV. I'm sorry, is effectively 800 million relative to 3 pools 382 million. Frax is clearly the dominating liquidity pool on Curve. Enough said. Mic drop. Now, following though, we had to switch gears a little bit and talk about Sam K's actually first kind of foray into crypto, and that is with IQ, aka BrainDAO. Like I said, founded by Sam K, and their flagship product is the IQ Wiki product. And you can find basically Wikipedia-esque pages for all of our guests that come onto Flywheel. And today, actually, I want to talk about their staking here. And their staking is very similar to what you see on Curve or Frax, where you kind of have a choice to lock up your IQ from 1 to 4 years, 1 week to 4 years, and the voting power 4x's for the 4 year lock. And obviously, it goes down linearly after that. And it also decays linearly, just like how Curve and Frax does. Now, on the next slide, why would you want to stake? Well, there's 126 reasons why you should stake, and that is I apologize, 124 reason. That's 124% APR, and there are currently only 179 stakers in the IQ pool, IQ lockers. Two hold slash stakers since we started covering this. So hopefully we were responsible for getting more people to jump over there. But there are 1,745 of you folks out there that are not staking that are currently on Ethereum. So please go and enjoy some of this sweet 124% APR. And additionally, there's plenty of liquidity on chain in the LP pool for Frax Swap at 6.6 million. So go ahead and take a look into that if you're interested. But question is, why even do all of this? Well, on the next slide, you'll see that by LPing, you actually get to touch on a fairly large treasury at 15.7 million, and you get to decide kind of what this treasury does and how it's put to use. Currently, right now, the treasury comprises of 34% in FrxETH and 13% in Convex, and they have protocol-owned liquidity of almost of 1.3 mil, with a new $1 million being deployed into FraxLend. So 1 million Frax into FraxLend. So the treasury is definitely active and moving, and you can be a part of that by staking your IQ. Now, back to our regular programming with some pretty outstanding numbers. FrxETH grew by nearly 12% this week, up to 214,802 Frax Ethereum. And that, like, I've yet to see a week bump this big at almost like 11.9% growth from last week. It's just awesome. Like now we're re-entering in that like verticalness of that graph that I just love. And obviously we also broke 200K. Yay. But where are we? Where are all these Frax ETH hanging out? And we see that 2/3 of them, this kind of breaks nicely, is in the SFrax ETH kind of staking contract, earning that native yield. About 23% hanging out in Curve LP, and then the remaining 11% just chilling in the ether. So definitely love to see where all these guys are hanging out, but it's still a stable coin, right? FrxETH is still a stable coin at the end of the day. So we got to check the peg. On the next slide, you see that we have an exchange rate of 0.9992 on the dashboards for the FrxETH to ETH exchange rate. But we can't trust dashboards, so we got to go into the market for ourselves and try to swap 3,500 FrxETH for ETH and receive an exchange rate of 0.9991. Again, very tight delta here between the dashboard and the market. We love to see it, and that is a very strong swap rate for Curve for FrxETH. But how do we stack against our competitors? That's what we'll look at on the next slide, where we experienced a fairly nice growth this week. We're up 13% from last week, which we were stagnant. And we're currently sitting at 2.42% in market share. That is, we're climbing the charts quickly, as you can see in our 30-day delta, 30-day change, rather. We're at 40%. Our closest competitor, Rocket Pool, also grew by a large chunk at 34%. And for the last week, though, the last 7-day change, I want to highlight that we grew by 13%, whereas Rocket Pool only did 7. Now, granted, Rocket Pool is practically 3x our size, so that 7% is actually quite large. But nonetheless, we are still in the race to be amongst the top 3. And Coinbase wrapped ETH is constantly in a decline because they kind of have to be. And they're down 7% just over the last 7 days. And that's a fairly large number since they have almost 2 billion. They have more than 2 billion in ETH. Lido's market share has also been dropping. It's used to be in the 75%. Now it's in the 72.9%. So we kind of like to see it. But there's this new contender, a new challenger has arrived. That is Binance Staked ETH that I just saw them pop up this week on the charts, and they have about 130 million in ETH, and they kind of came out of nowhere. I'm very curious to see what the incentives are for Binance Staked ETH, but nonetheless, let's take a look at the yield department and see how everything shakes out. Here we have FraxETH clocking in at a nice solid 6% APY, with the closest competitor stake-wise coming in at 5.5%, and Rocket Pool underneath that at 5.17, Lido at a flat 5, and Anchor at 4.34. Nonetheless, ahead of the pack. That is what we do on FraxETH. All right, now next we have the F to the P to the I product. Here, we actually saw a bump of 100K in the supply. So somebody minted an extra 100K of FPI this week. Cheers. That is now up to 82.6 million. The current annual inflation index is still at 5%. And good news is that the FPI's peg is actually 37 bips above the required peg. Now, how did it be above the peg? Well, that's because the treasury also increased. The treasury is now at 89 million, and that's comprised of both FPI and Frax. And they put that FPI and Frax into Convex, 46% of that to be exact, to facilitate the liquidity between the two pairs. And now there's this thing called equity, where you take all the assets in the treasury minus the liability of the FPI to the FPI holders. Then you receive this thing called equity at 4.5 million. In other words, if FPI folds tomorrow, that 4.5 million is distributed across the VEFPIS folks. So that's hence why we call it equity. Now, on the next slide, we normally
Wait,
cover Frax.
are you talking about the delta? Because I think you got that wrong. I think the the delta is the current price above the peg, and it's actually really beneficial because if the price is above the FPI peg, then the peg doesn't have to move that much. So right now the price of FPI is 0.37% over its peg.
Correct.
So that means that if there are any more inflation increases, the Frax Treasury actually doesn't have to pay for it as much. So
Correct.
It means more
It's
revenue.
like a buffer.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, so it means more revenue for FPI.
Correct.
For FPIS.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. I'm talking about the equity portion. The equity portion.
Equity portion's been pretty solid, or pretty. Yeah, it's 4.47. Yeah, so it's been pretty flat. So
Yeah. So yeah, that's what I meant by the equity portion. So Frax, the FPI has a asset side, if you were to look at it that way, of kind of all the fracs and all the other assets that's comprised of the asset side. Those assets are kind of put to work, and those assets earn yield. And with that, they have to cover their liability, which are all the minted FPI. So
Mhm.
you take all the assets minus the liabilities, you receive this thing called equity. And currently, right now, that equity is 4.5 million, meaning there was enough excess yield generated from the treasury to have, well, excess. So that's kind of where we're at 4.5 million in equity. But on the next slide, we normally cover Frax lenses TVL and number of borrowed, but however, there's been some difficult technical difficulties on the Frax Facts site, so we weren't able to pull that for you guys this week, but we'll definitely try to add it into the Substack post. But nonetheless, we get to take a look at some pairs here, and we recently added a new pair, the Aave Frax pair that was kind of on the bottom there. But nonetheless, I want to talk about the S FrxETH Frax pair, and that is still is only cost you 1.92% to borrow, where while earning 6% on your SFrax ETH. I think this is the best place to get that leveraged native staking yield.
I think we're gonna have to add like a Curve USD tracker because I'm looking at the page right now. There's 7.1 million of stake FrxETH collateral deposited and
I like that.
4.91 million CRV USD borrowed against it. It's pretty awesome.
Nice. What's the
The borrow
borrow
rate,
rate on that? Yeah.
3.24%.
Dang.
Well,
Okay.
I think it's a function of there being a $10 million cap
Cap.
right now. Yeah, they haven't really like it's still kind of in test and prod mode, like early few
Uh-huh.
weeks, and I don't think they've lifted yet. So once that gets lifted and they start, saying more and more fracs can come in, then it it's probably going to decrease a lot. But we expect 1 to 3% for right now.
I mean, how does that work? I thought it just kind of mints when it mints. Like there isn't a supply to, you know, add
Uh,
into that CRV USD SFrax ETH
yeah, but
pool per se.
there's limits. There's like a $10 million CRV USD limit on the stake frac ETH right now, and so it does have a utilization percentage that it uses, I believe.
Ah, I see.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Oh, that's weird. Okay. Actually, I don't quite understand it, but regardless, that's a good point. I'll add it in here since it is using SFrax ETH as a collateral. That's fair. But let's move it on to our last leg of the DeFi Trinity. That is the Frax swap. We had a nice bump of 1% here at 65.5 million in TVL, fairly solid. And then on the right hand side, you'll see a volume chart for our listeners at home. We're currently at 37 million in volume for the month of May so far. That represents a 56% utilization rate, which I think is one of the best in any DEX DeFi protocol, but yet nobody talks about it. Nonetheless, we move forward and we have the most swapped volumes. Here we have Frax, FXS, and Frax pair at 9.29 million. It's actually lower than usual. Usually, we kind of process and facilitate almost 15 million in volume for this specific pair, but it's been kind of around this 10 mil mark twice this month already. Underneath that is Sin Frax, which obviously has some great news this week. So that's why there's been some activity there. And then underneath that, we have Frax and FPIS, then IQ Frax. So again, quick PSA, if you're not staking IQ and earning 124% APR, hopefully you are at least LPing. So you get some of this great yield here. And then lastly, we have our our Frax WETH pair, which is great for DCAing if that's what you guys are looking to do. So anyways, that is the last of our DeFi Trinity leg. Now let's move forward to some profitability. First check, we're gonna look at the AMOs, the money making machines. So for Curve AMO, it's the Curve AMO is unchanged for the week, and the liquidity AMO increased small by 300K, but the lending AMO made big leaps this week, up 10.2 mil to $95.2 million in the lending AMO.
Hmm.
And I'll show you where that $10 million went in a little bit. The investor AMO is also kind of flat, up 100K. So in total, we have 826 million in AMO assets, and that is up 1.4% for the month. In terms of the actual profitability of each AMO, you see that the convex AMO for May on the next slide has a profit of, or rather a loss of 520K. And obviously we only have a week left in May, so I definitely feel that we're gonna eat some pain here. Let me just check my calendar real quick. Yeah, we would definitely have to pay for a Vodium epoch within the end of May here. So we will see a red May for convex for sure.
For sure.
Nonetheless, for sure. And like as promised, on the next slide, I'll show you exactly where that 10 million came from. And that was bumped right into the FraxLend AMO with 75 million Frax being lent into FraxLend,
Cool.
or rather minted. The actual lent amount is 63.7 million of lent into the FraxLend. So obviously the Frax treasury is the largest user of the FraxLend product, which I kind of love to see it, right? You got to dog food yourself. And that's where we're at 75 million minted, 63.7 million lent, and we have a max allocation cap of 155 million. So we're halfway through the cap so far already. Definitely like that. Now, for the FraxLand revenue for May, we actually have a little bit higher than that. I didn't get a chance to update, but we're currently at 45.1 million. So we're kind of 3 weeks in. So if you think about it, we make about like 15K a week for our FraxLand revenue, which, kind of break that down is a 1.2% every 7 days. Kind of insane. Kind of insane for us to be making that every week, right? And if you kind of take that, divide that by the total lent amount, you probably get about like almost 10% or so, give or take. Let me see, 66. Yeah, so really, really strong return there for the FraxLand AMO, in my opinion. Now, good thing is on the next slide, we're flat for the May revenue. And the next slide for those listening is the FraxLand liquidations. Everyone has been safe ever since the slaughtering of last week. Everybody stayed in their lane and greatly reduced their leverage. So we've only remained at 15.5K for the month so far on liquidation. Our last liquidation was 10 days ago. And yeah, that's all I can say. Like I'm glad everybody kind of cleaned up stuff a little bit, and the market has been quiet, so there hasn't been much movement. But definitely glad to see no one's getting wrecked out there. On the next slide, you'll see one of the king. This is the FPI revenue, which is printing a solid 116.6K for May so far. One of the strongest money making machines in the Fraxis stablecoin, Fraxis suites of product. So you love to see that. And now, as a summary on the next slide, you'll see that we'll cover the convex AMO down 520K, FraxLend pulling in 45K, FraxLend liquidations pulling in 15K, FrxETH pulling in 182K, and FPI pulling in 116. And just for an asterisk, for FrxETH, I basically took the FrxETH supply, multiplied that by an average 7% APR. Then I multiply that by 8%, which is Frax's kind of fee take rate. And then I multiply it by the price of ETH at the time that I made this chart and divide it by 12. So that so
Does that seem
far,
a little bit weird? Like, can we talk about the difference between like FPI with $100 million or less than
mm-hmm,
89 million dollars,
mm-hmm,
able to generate about $115 monthly? But looking at your AMO convex revenue, like
mm-hmm,
the
mm-hmm.
revenues for like it should be a lot higher, right? There's like 700 million. Hold on, how much is in curve?
Yeah,
So it's 525 million in curve, but it's generating, I guess, 800. I mean, I guess it's not that. So it's about 5 times more, but it's generating, I guess it's on par, maybe generating a little bit more than the FPI. It's just
I
all
think
the
it's the bribes that kills. Yeah, I think on a net basis, because I kind of grouped the FPI frax bribes into this
Hmm.
AMO convex. So I'm making the convex AMO take the brunt of the expenses. Um, but I think the also bigger part is once you get to a large enough size, it gets kind of difficult to just generate yield. And
Yeah,
the convex AMO is at 500 million, which is fairly sized. That size is size.
it needs
So
more trading revenue, really.
yeah, and it just doesn't get that much love,
Yeah,
So
exactly.
frankly, so that's but fair assessment. I think for FraxETH though, like I really wish we had a kind of a cleaner break to see like, hey, this is the actual 8% of the ETH that's coming in, and then we just track that. Um, the actual quantity of ETH that goes into the treasury every month. Like that's ideally what I want to be able to track moving forward. But that is it for the third week of May. We have a loss of 160K so far. Um, I expect us to definitely be in the red for May just because of the bribe that we are going to have to pay on the 30th of May. So next week, we'll definitely be talking about that as well. But yes, that is it for FraxCheck. I believe this is number 40, and we'll catch you next week. Unless, Sam, you have any final thoughts?
No, looks good. All good. See you again next week.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for tuning in with us again for this week for FraxCheck number 40, and we'll catch you on the flip. Peace.